Hi everyone, welcome to my Twitter space. Here, basically, we have conversations with women leaders in the open source ecosystem. So today, I am excited to have Cheryl here with me to share her story and experiences around her participation in open source projects. Cheryl is currently a Senior Director of Infrastructure at ARM. Hi, Cheryl again. I am so glad we are having this conversation today, and thank you so much for accepting to participate in Open Source Stories with Regina.
I'm really glad as well. Thank you for inviting me.
You're
Great to
welcome.
be here.
How are you doing today?
I am really good. I'm really good. Yeah, it's a little bit. I'm in London. It's a little bit rainy today,
Uh-huh.
but it's getting warmer
Uh-huh.
here, and we're heading towards summer, so feeling good.
Hmm. Yeah,
How
same
about
thing
yourself?
here in Sweden. Yeah, I'm in Sweden at the moment. I work here and I live here right now. And
Hmm.
it's actually getting warmer as well and really nice. So let's look at personal questions. These are basically, I feel like that's the best way to get started, right? Can you tell, us, the listeners, a little about your background and how you got involved in open source?
Sure. So I'm a software engineer by background. I actually knew from probably my teenage years that my goal in life was to be a software engineer at Google because, Google at the time was this very cool young startup. It's changed a lot, obviously, now, but uh, I went and I was at Google for 5 years, writing mainly C++ code for Google Maps, backend features on Google Maps. It wasn't until I left Google that I started to get into meetups and community, and I was just exploring all different kinds of events and just finding out what was out there in tech. And I moved into DevOps and cloud from that time. And about, I don't know, a year later, I was working for a small startup. I was employee number 12 at the startup as a developer advocate. And I was looking at places that I could go speak at and go do technical talks. So I was looking, cloud native was kind of the up and coming thing in 2017. So I looked around for cloud native meetups, and there was a cloud native Berlin and a cloud native Paris, and there wasn't a cloud native London. So I went to my manager and I said, wouldn't it be cool if we just started a meetup, and we can see how it goes? Luckily, he was very enthusiastic about it, gave me a lot of support. And I started the first one with really nothing. So, I picked a date, and that was probably 8 weeks away. We have no speakers, no venues, no talks, no audience, nothing. Just put it up on meetup.com. Um, and the very first event, I scrambled for those 8 weeks to figure it out. The first event, over 100 people showed up. So I was like, wow, okay, there's definitely a lot of demand here. And from then on, I really got involved in open source through these community events. And then later on through working at the Linux Foundation, which is an open source nonprofit, which is exclusively around open source. So that's my background. So software, I tend to say sort of software, cloud native, and open source, particularly through meetups and events.
Wow, I think that's quite inspiring. I mean, having to take the bold step to basically start something within cloud native. Could you say a little bit about what is cloud native basically? What do they do and everything?
Sure. Cloud native is a kind of style of very flexible infrastructure. So it's kind of was kind of pioneered by the way that Google did infrastructure, which is why I was familiar with it, from Google's Borg, which they've talked about in the past. But really, the kind of open source version of Borg is Kubernetes, and the idea behind cloud native is it allows you to scale your infrastructure very quickly, scale it up, scale it down, control it through APIs and automation, so that you're not having individual say sysadmins run commands on um, different machines. And the real ultimate benefit of it is it means that you can trust your infrastructure to be more reliable. So that allows software teams to ship faster and therefore deliver features faster and be able to have more um, faith in the features that they're rolling out, that it's not going to crash your service, it's not going to cause problems. That's how I would sum up cloud native.
I'm basically curious about what led you to, approach your manager that you would want to create a community.
Um, Honestly, I think I thought it would just be fun, to be honest. Um, at the time, as I said, I was trying to do more talks, more technical talks, and I thought it'd be fun to build up a community and build the kind of community that I would want to be a part of. So very welcoming, inclusive, low barrier to entry, offer people a sort of friendly environment where they could learn interesting technical things and also, eat pizza and have a relaxed chat with
Yeah.
others. And that's kind of all I ever really wanted for it. It was never, you know, it was never a case that the company wanted me to do it or the company wanted to promote their brand or whatever. It was purely because I felt this would be fun, something fun that I wanted to do.
Mm. Yeah, I think I can relate to that. It's basically same with me when I got into the Gnome Foundation. I just really wanted to do something, build a community around it as well. So I think it just happens when you have more like I would say interest in building communities. You would always want to take every opportunity you have to do one. But you made mention of inclusive, and do you think your participation in open source has more like helped in that aspect of building inclusive communities?
Um, I think it's helped in multiple ways. So,
Hmm.
I've benefited from it as well. So one of the reasons that I really um, wanted to join the cloud native community in the first place was because I felt this community really cares about inclusivity and being welcoming, offering the stage to underrepresented minorities. And I felt very sort of welcome because of that. So, for instance, the biggest conference in this space is called KubeCon, and they always offer scholarships for underrepresented groups. And the first one that I went on one of these scholarships. They paid for all my travel there, and when I went there, I knew there were others who were also on these kind of scholarships. And for me, that was something that was really meaningful. I was, not at all known in this community, not someone who had. It wasn't something that I earned in a way, but it was something they were willing to freely extend to me. And I've tried to offer that back to others, mainly through the Cloud Native London meetup. So, as I said, I try and make it welcoming and easy for people to join, but I also make a specific effort to offer speaking slots for women and for other groups who are underrepresented. And I try and prioritize the people who haven't already had those opportunities in the past. That's something that I hold very, very strongly.
I also benefited from one of the scholarships. I think that was also Cloud Native, but I think it was a virtual scholarship that was 2 years ago. And
Mm.
it was nice to basically have that level of, opportunity. And as at the period, I think I was quite new within the open source space. I had spent, I think, 2 years ish before I got that particular opportunity. So it was great to find out that we have certain level of these opportunities that is created for underrepresented group. So as you know that open source stories with Regina is basically want to inspire more women participation in open source. How do you find balance with your personal life as a woman, your career,
Mm.
and your work in open source? Because from what I know, except for now that we have OSPO and people basically now working within um people is now working with open source, contributing and getting paid. I know that open source is basically volunteer driven. So how do you balance all of this together?
Mm. That is always a challenge, isn't it? Because open source, by definition, it's sort of a common good for organizations. So unless you are lucky enough to be paid directly to work on it, then it is something you do out of your own time. And I've gone back and forth on this in different parts of my career and different jobs that I've had. So as I said before, I worked at the Linux Foundation on the at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and my work there was 100% open source. So that made it very easy. I was literally paid to work on open source. Um, Now my job at I'd say is probably more like 10 or 20% open source. So there's still some aspects of contribution, but it's not the majority of what I do anymore. And in addition to that, um, I have a baby, I have a child, and so my free time has become much less. And I think when you're earlier in your career, you can dedicate more free time to exploring things like open source, and it gets harder the longer that um, the more other things you take on in life. I think this is an eternal question, right? How do you balance it? And I'm not sure there is a good answer apart from you have to be really ruthless about what matters to you and what you leave behind. So for me, the meetup is something that I'm very proud of. I've spent 6 years building it up. We have 7,000 members. I run monthly events, and I have prioritized running that because this to me is a way that I stay connected to the community and I'm building something for the community. But there are other parts of my work and of my personal life that uh, I drop for that. And I don't think there's a good way to decide, like, how do you balance it other than you make decisions on what's important to you and what's not.
To be honest, I think that one phrase you had said that is very important. I think as you get older, you take on more responsibilities, and the realities are that you might not be able to do as much as you want to do. But I'm just curious. When we talk mainly, I've been to several conferences, and taking on a leadership role within a non-project has opened my eyes to more like um, practical experiences at contribution within open source and so with research as well. Is there anything you think that we could do to encourage the participation of women, for instance, in the open source project that would um, still drive in more women participation, even as we take on other things? Is there any way you think that open source projects could help to support women much more than um, we are currently doing at the moment?
Mm. So this is something that is quite interesting to me because in theory, open source community sounds like it should be very open and welcoming and anyone can participate, anyone can join in. And yet if you look at the data, the statistics for women's participation in open source is much worse than women in tech overall. Women in tech overall tends to be around 15-20%, and in open source, it's about 3%, um, which is kind of at odds to the ethos of open source. So I would say that my biggest breaks, let's say, in open source, have come from people who believed in me and gave me a shot, gave me a chance to do something that I hadn't done before and I didn't know if I could do, but they believed in me. So I've only talked about the meetup, as I said, where I said, I don't know if it's going to be possible to start a community because I've never done it before. but I'll try it, and my manager supported me in that. And the second big opportunity I remember is when I was looking for a new role, and I had an offer from AWS, but I wasn't really keen to take that offer. So I reached out directly to CNCF, to Chris at the time, and said, "Look, I've got this job offer, but at AWS, but I want to know, is there anything interesting coming up at CNCF that, I could be a good fit for?" And he said, "Yes, we're hiring for this director of ecosystem role. You should apply, and you should come and join us." And that to me was um so sort of gratifying. So because I had never done this role, I hadn't had a director level role before. Um, I knew Chris a little bit. I'd spoken to him a little bit, but not very well. So for him to take this chance on me was a really big deal for me, and that um, gave me a much bigger push in my career and in my work in open source. So you, when it comes to how we can encourage other women to participate in open source, I think people like you and I who have some experience, and who can see these opportunities, we need to also reach out and offer these opportunities to other women because they probably don't know that these opportunities exist, right? They don't have the connections, they don't have the insights, and so it's easy for us to say, "Oh, just get started," but it's very hard to know where to get started. So I would say that sort of mentorship and sponsorship has been the biggest driver for me, and something that I think if I could, I'd love to offer that to more women.
Think you've said it all. When you think of the gap within the tech space and you think of the gap within what we have with women in open source, I don't know if you've taken a look at pictures, if you have to look at pictures of um, conferences. I mean, the gap is very clear as to what is going on. I mean, I recall last year I went to a conference and we were like, apart from the people that were basically planning the conference, we're two women. The others were just those that helped in planning the conference, and the rest were, men. Personally, I was, you know, I was not happy. And this is
Mm,
basically one of the drivers of open source stories. I think I was not happy. I felt like something was missing and something needs to be done as fast as possible. Because what we share within the open source ecosystem is something that is supposed to drive in more participation from both, genders. Because it's just quite, surprising that instead we are having the opposite here is the case. And that takes me on to my next question. Do you think that maybe apart from not being aware, like you've mentioned, apart from not knowing that these opportunities exist, apart from all of this, do you think that there are more like challenges that are unique to women within the open source space? Do you think that there are things that women are facing within the open source space that is, pushing them farther away from being contributors at open source projects?
mhm. Mm. What sort of challenges are you thinking of? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that they are, because do you find some criticism, research online talking about women not being um, properly recognized when they're having their contributions and all of that done? Do you think that this could be some of the reason why women are getting farther away from contributing to open source projects?
I think there is the perception that women are not as technical or not as interested or not as committed or whatever. I don't think that's true. I've known a lot of women who are some are more technical, some contribute in non-technical ways, but people who are really committed, really enthusiastic. There's a lot of work in open source that is not just writing code, and I think it is harder to recognize the contributions. So, for instance, as I said, I built up a community, right? A meetup, but people still quite often hear that and they think, oh, an events organizer. And sometimes it is a little bit challenging, a little bit frustrating to say, like, well, this is not actually just about, I don't just order pizza and, you know, like, not that that stuff is not important, but building up a open source community requires a lot more, right? So I think the challenges are more of perception and of women who don't have those connections so that they can find those opportunities or um, have those ideas, have their ideas supported. I feel very lucky that I have now got enough support. So if I wanted to do something like um, found a startup or write a book or like any of these kind of things, I could do those as well. And I'm pretty sure I could know who to talk to. But I think one of the biggest challenges is just we're all the open source community is quite disconnected, even though it's online and it's in some ways you think again it should be more connected because it's all online. But um, if you're not lucky enough to be able to attend these conferences and meet people face to face, then it's much harder for people to get to know you and then to have those connections and those ins to these groups.
Yeah, I think that you have mentioned something that is quite interesting. That's basically, I would say, is trivializing all the contributions that are not technical, and basically thinking that they are not also work within the open source space. For instance, I started contribution with the engagement group at GNOME, and engagement is basically more like marketing and outreach to people within the tech community to become contributors at the GNOME project. So yes, these things are maybe there's need to preach more. There's need to let people know that there are other aspects of open source that you can participate that is non-technical. Maybe there's need to basically stress and emphasize more on the need to appreciate the work that everyone does within the open source, regardless of what it is, whether it is contributing to code or contributing to documentation or basically doing outreach and all of them. These are all ways we are all contributing to build the open source ecosystem. So yeah, I think that's a very valid
Mm.
point.
Sorry, the CNCF actually had an award for this, which was
Mm,
called Chop Chop Wood, Carry Water.
mm,
Is to recognize all of these tasks that happen in the background. They have to happen, and someone has to do them, even if they're not the glamorous tasks, the ones that are out in front.
mm,
But I always really liked the ethos of this award because truly, um, the more people that get involved with a community, the more coordination and overhead and these thankless tasks that need to happen. So I agree with you. I think it's really important. I think it'd be a great idea to have more recognition for these kind of people who do this work.
mhm. What we are doing right now is having a conversation that's going to be shared across different platforms. People are going to come back to listen to this, and hopefully, they would get action points on things they could do within their own community as well to appreciate more people and what they do at the background. I would check on this award and see if I could get more like a few um, documentation on it. Possibly, I could share it and advise people to look at how that award is done within CNCF and see if other communities can adopt that as well. Because I think that's a great one to appreciate people that are doing other things within the open source space. I mean, not everyone is going to write codes, right? Someone is going to document the code. Someone is going to make an outreach. Someone is going to create an event. All of these are all key part of driving the open source project towards success.
Yeah,
So
100%.
what do you think are some of the most exciting development in open source today that gets you really excited?
Mm. Um, I'm still within, um, mostly within sort of cloud and infrastructure, but
Mm,
lately I've been branching out into um, other areas of infrastructure as well through my work. So, for example, 5G and telco and networking. And I find these quite interesting because traditionally they've been very, very, let's say, not open source friendly.
mm,
But there's some amazing initiatives. For instance, there's a cloud native telco group,
mm,
which is trying to bring those same benefits that we've seen of innovation, faster innovation, and sharing the cost and better security of open source through industries like telco that haven't um, haven't really been open to it so far.
mm.
So that's something I'm keeping a close eye on.
Wow,
Finance is
that
another one. Finance is another
okay.
one that I think, has always been um, uh, uh, it's difficult to move quickly to make big changes
Mm,
in finance because of the compliance regulatory requirements. But finance is also starting to come around and starting to do more open source work and use more open source as well. So I'm really most excited by these big shifts in the industry where I think 10 years from now, the culture of telco and finance could be pretty different on the tech side.
mm. Wow, and I mean, it's quite interesting to see that we're going to have a lot of things going on in the future within the open source space. I mean, if we have things that are more like impossible to be open sourced right now, getting open source, I'm excited for the future. So let's look into a little bit about your future plans and basically advice. What are your future plans within the community you're building at the moment? What do you hope to achieve with CNCF London?
I mean, I've built it to a point now where it's pretty, um, I would say pretty successful.
Mm,
We have really consistent monthly events. I have speakers booked up until 2024.
wow.
So all the next, you know, 7 months or 8 months are booked up for speakers. So I feel really good about that. Since the pandemic, I would say we have to work a little bit harder to get the company sponsorship.
Mm,
And that's really because we have costs. There are costs to running such an event. Um, and if I don't manage to cover my costs, then I pay for it myself out of pocket. But
mm,
luckily, that hasn't happened too many times so far. So companies that um, I want to make sure that it's sustainable. I
mm,
don't draw any kind of income or salary from it. I'm lucky enough that I also work and you know sustain my livelihood from my full-time work. But
mm,
I would like the meetup. I would like to make sure that I can continue running it for the community for as long as there's interest, to be honest. Um, so that's my only goal for it right now. As I said, I have a baby. I actually have
yeah.
another baby on the way now, so my
Wow.
time is even more going to be tight in the
Congratulations.
morning. Thank you very much. Um, so it's something that's really important to me, but I just want to sort of keep maintaining it, make sure that you know people continue to feel welcome as they come and attend. And we give them really good technical content that's really interesting and fun, and just make sure that everyone feels that, yeah, that they can be a part of the community as well.
An advice for anyone that would want to start a community as yours, any woman out there that is in a community that feels that there is a gap in their own, um, geographic location, and they would want to do something that you're doing at the moment with CNC Have, what would your
Mm.
advice be to them?
My advice initially would be go and attend lots of other events, as many as you can, other meetups, and see what makes a good experience for you as an
Mm,
attendee. What things do you think are really important? What are the locations that people host their events in? What kind of speakers come up? And then just be brave, really. As I said, I picked a date 8 weeks away with absolutely nothing prepared,
mm,
and because the demand was there and the interest was there, we managed to pull it all together within 8 weeks and get over 100 people to attend. I would say it's probably a little bit harder now because
mhm.
since the pandemic, people are not in the office
Yeah.
most days. Um, so it's a lot harder nowadays. But also, I would say um, don't feel like it's all or nothing, right? Nothing
Hmm.
has to be perfect the first time. It probably took at least a year of little gradual adjustments to make the event something that is now very stable and simple to run. When the pandemic hit, we had to scramble and put everything online. When the pandemic, quote unquote, ended, we had to sort of figure it all out again and do it all from scratch. So I think persistence pays off
Mm.
more than anything else. You know, do your research, but then take a risk and just be persistent at it.
Yeah, I think that's the right word. Do your research, take a risk, and be persistent at it. I look forward to attending one of the events in London. I will just
I
let you
hope
know.
so, yeah.
Just to end with the final question, what do you think that women or new contributors to open source, what do you think are the most important thing they should look at in an open source project before they begin their contribution?
I would say there's two important things here. One is this something that personally resonates with you? Is this
Mm,
something that you think is interesting, you think is fun and worth working on? Because if you don't think it's worth working on, then it's going to be very hard to sustain that effort.
mm,
So it has to really appeal to you personally. And then the second point is look at the people in the community because really open source is just a group of individuals. It's just a community of people. Do you think that the people in the community are the kind of people who you want to be working with, who are upholding the kind of values that you want to support? 99% of communities out there are great, and the people are individually very, really good, really hardworking and well-meaning people. But make sure that it's a group that you feel comfortable with as well, that you think are trying to do the right thing. Yeah, I would say that's my advice for you. If you're looking for at an open source project or community or whatever, think about whether this is worth doing for yourself, and then look at the people and make sure that those people are the people you want to be working with.
yeah. Do you have any final words before to say to anyone? Um, can listeners reach out to you? Um, and how would you prefer that they reach out to you if they have any questions of anything whatsoever?
Sure. You can always reach out to me on either LinkedIn or Twitter. I have open messages on both. I I have to be picky with my time now.
Mm,
So if people reach out to me and say, can we just chat? Then I'm less likely to say yes to it. But if they
of
say,
course.
oh, I've been thinking of this, or here are some challenges I faced, and I think I'd like to chat to you because, you know, oh, I heard in this interview with Regina that you say something similar, like then I'm more likely to say, okay, yeah, let's chat about it. So I would say I'm definitely open to people reaching out to me, but uh, if you're someone who wants to reach out, then I would say maybe just put together a little bit of um, thought about what you want from people.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I would just say, you know, good luck. It's really wonderful. I think getting involved with open source is fantastic. I've made a lot of great friends through it. My career has definitely had a big boost through open source. So yeah, good luck.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. We've had more like um a practical discussion, and it's quite emotional as well to basically have this conversation with you. Um,
I've enjoyed
do
chatting
you?
with you as well. Thank you very much for setting this all up.
You're also going to be receiving an appreciation card from me, just to say thank you for joining.
Oh, that's rather sweet. Thank you.
Yeah.